This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Right, well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar session this lunchtime. Very pleased to welcome and introduce Jane Hales, who's, take a wave Jane, who's going to share some of her inspiring ideas on curious leadership to give us some strategies for driving growth mindsets. Now, Jane is the co-founder and managing partner of Sapio Research, which is a full-service agency largely working with PR and marketing agencies. And as is not uncommon for market researchers, she fell into it by accident. Her heart was set on having a job in environmental sciences, saving the world and keeping our rivers clean. So that was a good ambition. But a temporary 2-year stint in a B2B agency quickly expanded, she says, into 20 plus years. So in what she says, in her words, felt like the twilight of her career, I couldn't possibly comment on that, she found herself owning her own agency, which now has, I believe, 10 people, and discovering a whole new side to herself. So today, she's going to be talking about how her own experiences have impacted on her leadership style and company culture. So before just holding over to Jane, I'm just saying we are recording this session. It might be worth everybody going on mute whilst Jane is presenting, and then we can open up for questions at the end. Okay, so over to you, Jane, and thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. The phone rang. I quickly turned down the volume of the 10 o'clock news. The voice at the other end of the phone said, "I've been sacked." It was my boss of 20 years, and he said, "The new research kids on the block, our company wants us to merge with the new research kids on the block, and they only bought them a couple of months ago, and there's no room for 2 MDs, so I'm no longer with them." As I sat back down with my family to watch the television and take the news in, the phone rang again. This time it was about me. No, I wasn't being sacked. I was being asked to take the team from the countryside into the city and lead the merger with a new company. But then the CEO said to me, "But don't worry, your boss has asked to stay for a little bit longer so he can help you do the move." Well, I was confused. I didn't know whether I was being trusted with this or not. I felt stifled and awkward. How was I going to be doing the communication with the team, keeping them engaged, while also not upsetting somebody that I'd set the company up with 10 years before? I felt ill-equipped. Who should stay? Who should go? And where was my role going to be in all of this? It felt like big responsibilities, and I wasn't feeling ready for it. It didn't feel like the opportunity that I think it would seem to other people. Nevertheless, 5 years ago, I decided I've got to make the best of this. I've got to be a good employee, and I've got to take them in. So I took the team in, settled them in, and we got to work. But it was a car crash. Soon into it, the phone was ringing with unhappy clients. The new systems we were having to use, the new software just wasn't working for us. The team was working late. The quality of what's happening wasn't great, and there was stress all around. In fact, there was panic attacks for my team and myself. It wasn't a pretty situation to witness. I was frustrated. I wasn't being listened to by my bosses. I'm not quite sure where to go from there. So 8 months after the restructure, I decided to take matters into my own hands. There must be a better way of doing this. So what do you do when you don't feel that you particularly like your bosses and you don't feel particularly employable? You start trying to do it on your own, and you start setting up your own company. However, I didn't take that matter lightly. I was very conscious that whatever I set up, this team that I was going to work with would feel as though they were comfortable and secure, that they knew what was going on, and that they felt confident to be able to make a difference and say things that they wanted to. So over the next 4 years, I've dived into books, I've spoken to mentors, and I've joined various programs. And one of those actually was the EO Network, an accelerator program there. I've met some fantastic people, and I managed to graduate, so that was fantastic. And as part of this process, I've also done an awful lot of reflection of both me as an employee and an employer. Now, I'm grateful to say I have thriving company culture. I'm really proud of it. We were deemed to be one of the best suppliers for our clients, among our key clients last year. We won a customer service award, and we grew by 22% during the pandemic and taking on staff. So I feel incredibly lucky as well as grateful. That possibly doesn't seem such a big deal to many people, because I know there are a lot of successful businesses out there. But I personally feel the fact that in the first 2 years of our business, one of our founders left and another one went on maternity leave for a year. We took a while to get going, and we're only about 4.5 years into it. So I believe that the power within, the power with, and the power to is a much better management style rather than the more negative and coercive power over. As background, you're obviously aware we're a market research company, but through the accelerator program that I've been doing, I've been speaking to an awful lot of businesses that are nothing to do with market research. And I get a lot of questions from those people. And one of the key ones is, why have you all got the same job titles? Why do you and your directors all call yourselves managing partners? Why are you not called the CEO, given that you own the largest amount of equity? Good questions. And so today, in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to walk you through some of the key aha moments and the realizations and maybe the reflections on my particular style of leadership. It might not be right for everybody, so please feel free to take the bits out of it that work for you and ignore the bits that don't. But my aim is to help you develop a kind of environment whereby you're fostering the growth mindset in a non-hierarchical environment, in a collaborative way. Because you deserve to feel equipped rather than unsure. You deserve to understand your impact and know that your ideas are landing. You deserve to work with any team, and instead of lacking in confidence, knowing that what you're contributing is of value and it's making a difference. So I'd like to talk you through the first particular area today. So curiosity, obviously for researchers, that's one of those words that comes up an awful lot in terms of what we do as our work, in terms of our career. But through the conversations I've been having, actually, I've had reflections back to me in terms of the way that I'm not just perhaps doing my work that way, but I'm applying it to myself as well. As you've probably realised, I have 2 other business partners, Jess and Andrew. They're fantastic. They are very bright young people. I actually gave them their first proper job out of university. So yes, I'm old enough to be their mother. But it's not all been plain sailing since we've been working together. You say we started off as 4 and then we went to 3. That wasn't an easy situation because none of us had led from the front before. I'm the sort of person that didn't even manage to get ahead of the brownie pack, ahead of the Girl Guides pack. I was always number 2, and they were just 4 or 5 years into their career. So hence there wasn't a huge amount of leading from the front kind of experience. And it turns out that when you don't know your value, you end up hustling. So jumping in, offering opinions, wanting to be involved with sign off, having an opinion, and kind of almost getting in the way if you're not careful, even if somebody else has got their bases covered. I hadn't necessarily heard of the word hustle until recently, other than perhaps associating it with cards or some movies or something. But when I looked into it more, it kind of made sense, because the term I'm more familiar with hearing is probably control freak. That kind of, you want to be involved with everything, you don't want to let it go. So hustling is a great way of learning, particularly at the beginning of your career, what you're good at and where your place sits. But it's not a great way of leading a team with clarity. It can get in the way emotionally as well as in terms of confusion. So part of what I'm doing in terms of the conversations I've had with, I don't know whether you've heard of EOS practitioners. There's a book called Traction by Gina Wicks, and it's a way of looking at things and setting up processes. Chaos ensued processes is what we've tried to do to manage the process. In the good old days, I did work with Marquesa. It felt like a restrictive kind of process. It may well have changed by now, but the EOS process is more about getting into meeting rhythms and getting into huddles and the communication starts. Because throughout my career, I've been told that it's not possible to map out the kind of things that we do. It's so quick changing. We're working on projects between 1,000 and 70,000 at any one time. And when we were looking at this, we were roughly doing about 20 projects at a particular time. There was a lot of moving things. But having been an employee for quite some time, and I'm sure you kind of felt it as well, if you've not been given clear instructions as to what good looks like, if you've not been given the steps to achieve it, it's a really difficult thing to do. So hence the idea of setting up various standards is what we've aimed at. It's taken us about 2 years, but we've got into a rhythm that works for us. And now I am the baddie in terms of not being able to do things on time. There are various pros and cons, of course, in terms of being a curious leader. You have to start again on some of these things. However, there are many positives. And the information process style, I think, is possibly the area that we've had the most conversations about. An area that probably feels quite familiar if you're used to working in agencies or environments whereby you have the qualitative people and the quantitative people, and in terms of the way that our minds think. This in itself, while working in a boardroom environment, has caused difficulties in terms of communication. I typically will rock up with, I don't know, half-formed, enthusiastic ideas, but not necessarily with a plan of how to execute them. And then my colleagues will turn up with ideas that are perhaps more thought through, less of them potentially less original. Between us, we manage to work things out, but it does cause elements of confusion and frustration. I did kind of put that down as much to the fact that I wasn't being great at arguing logically, perhaps. I'm not great at the ideas that I have, and I've kind of struggled with that. So it wasn't until, there are various books that I've tried to read to try to understand that. I'm not sure, for example, whether you've heard about The Surrounded by Idiots, and that wasn't meant to be rude in terms of referencing my colleagues, but it was a book that was given to me by a mentee that I'd worked with in terms of team management, and the Colby Index. So we've looked at all of those to see where we fit, and there is a jigsaw, but there is still this kind of not quite communicating on the same level thing happening. So actually I was really relieved to read the difference in a particular professor talking about the grounded theory approach of research, whereby from a qualitative perspective, you're likely to look at things, adding the dots, seeing the patterns that jump up, and it's not particularly structured, and you go away and find a hypothesis to fit. And that's where I tend to come from. Whereas my colleagues are coming from the point of view of data, quantitative boxes, looking down on it and feeling that everything needs to be black and white. So we have two quite different communication approaches there. Knowing that, we can work around it. So it's not just a personality type, it is the way that our brains are kind of wired and the bits that suit us in our jobs. So I've had to learn a better way of communicating. I've had to learn to step back and let the passion die down. So we're all very invested in the business, and I've had to learn how to control my own responses because we impact the environment that we're in. You can't control other people, but you can control yourself. So that was an interesting thing. So the idea of being empathetic. This is partly to do with the process mapping, whereby we're looking to understand where we're doing in terms of the tasks. So we've tried to allocate accountabilities for each other. So you do this, you do that, you do the other, kind of nice box fitting. But somebody else's job is always that much more interesting than your own. It's always interesting to see what's going on over the fence. So that we're still working on that. We haven't necessarily got there, but the aha moment that I got around that was the idea of watching and listening to the conversations about potentially not wanting to give things up. So the idea of the superpowers. So we're having our conversations about who does what, and these guys are very bright, they've got these places quickly, but what got them there is not necessarily what's going to get them there in the future. And the idea of letting go their superpowers and training somebody else proved to be a bit of an Achilles heel as such. So once we realised that in effect it was the what do I do next bit, if I'm no longer the expert at this, I have to do something else. Where is my future? Where is my new value? It's proved to be some interesting conversations. And I think maybe that's the advantage of age, perhaps having had to reinvent myself a number of times and let go of the things that I thought were good about me. So we're now in a position where we're doing kind of succession planning in the 20s, which seems a little bit odd, but it's working for us. So we're thinking about the team's progression as well as us as individuals, and that whole bit of, yeah, I've been quite self-indulgent going on a course to do, I don't know, speaking in bits and pieces, but I think that's important. And they are also doing them other things that interest them, not always work things, but things that are developing them personally, and that's working nicely. Because I think the idea of attending to fears, actually, whatever those fears may be, is a really quite an important idea. And I think it's something we often forget. So last October, for example, we were in a fortunate position that was lots of work coming in and we could see resources getting tight. Trying to plan in terms of what we should be doing about it. And I was keen that we should get a new member of staff on board. That was kind of faced with elements of resistance in terms of forward planning, the confidence that we would have in terms of the COVID situation, which was very natural. But I needed to go out the office and I was going to be there and compound the issue with resources again. So kind of in my desperation when I was leaving, although I had plenty of things to do, I offered to personally line manage whoever were to come in and to manage them specifically, even though it was likely to be a quant job they were doing. I still felt that if I could be more involved with the person themselves, it would save some issue. So a few days later, after I'd come back from the break that I'd had, I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that we hadn't just hired one, but we'd had two new people, not at the same time, but the fact that there had been confidence to commit ourselves to employing two young people. So I was pleased and surprised. So when the dust settled, I did ask them, what was it? What was the change of heart? Why did you do that, given that it wasn't something that was on the agenda and it was pushed back quite significantly against before? And fair play, the response came back as in, I was afraid. I had so much work on my plate trying to get through things through the door. The last thing I could think about was the additional responsibility of having another person to look after. So the fact that you were able to take the responsibility of the line management off gave me time to think that this was possible. So that conversation in itself, I thought, was marvellous. The fact that that word fear was admitted to by a colleague, and the fact that we could deal with it, we could move forward, and that actually there isn't necessarily any shame in the idea of being afraid of things. Dealing with fears, talking about these things as we're going through, of course, can take a lot of emotional energy. It can take time, but it certainly does mean that there is the element of kind of feeling the love, sharing it and so forth, and it's a smoother way of working. Part of the fear, I mean, on a personal perspective, apart other things as well, is this idea of being open to criticism. We work within the team, and offering feedback to those beneath us often seems like an obvious thing to do. But the idea of taking feedback from those around you and those beneath you often doesn't feel so great. And it's something that we often don't do. But I personally felt that I need to understand the impact that I am having on my peers, my mannerisms, my tone and things like that has only got to help me perhaps become more aware and be able to act as that tool that is best for moving the business in the direction that it needs to do. Having experienced 360 degrees in the past, and not necessarily successful 360-degree conversations either, I was in a situation with my boss trying to have the conversation about how to, the things that the team generally felt weren't necessarily working for them. It was spun round and the issue to work on became actually a strength of the business, and that don't worry about it and the whole process is to pot. It's the process's fault, nothing wrong with the individual concerned. And unfortunately, we decided then to stop doing the 360 process and actually stop doing the whole staff development thing again. I can understand why that was difficult. It wasn't easy speaking about it, but it's this whole thing with vulnerability, I suppose. What you're going to hear you don't always like, but you kind of need to hear about it to act on it. So having introduced it to our business possibly about a year or so ago, it's easy giving it down, but to receive it. So for example, last October, we went through this process and I was being reviewed. And I have to admit that I was very surprised and shocked about some of the feedback I got back. And yeah, I didn't feel great about it. It turned out that I had made one of my colleagues feel very uncomfortable and had upset them. They'd lost sleep over a particular issue that I had pointed out. I'd spoken about what I considered to be a COVID breach that didn't necessarily help the business. They had taken it personally and it didn't work for them. I'm not sure I would have realised the impact I'd had on them at that time if we hadn't sat down and had this conversation. I mean, the advantage that we have 3 directors is that there's always a mediator, so that's marvellous. But nevertheless, it wasn't great news to hear. I wasn't proud of myself. But what that did enable me to do was to reflect on the situation. One of the first things we did actually was to put an extra line in our weekly meeting for us as directors to put a note about something that we are proud of, grateful of, or praise for the individual in terms of something they have done within the business that week, because we don't always know what's going on. So just that one simple activity by saying, you did a really good job of dealing with that particularly difficult client situation has helped our conversations and our understanding. So that was really good. And it's nice to start meetings off with a positive rather than a negative. So that's great. But the other thing that it helped me realise and reflect on was the fact that we're not actually so well aligned as a team in terms of where we want our business to go. That we're probably pulling in different directions. And that was quite a stark reminder of that. Sorry, I've got rain coming through. Hopefully that's a bit quieter. So yeah, being open to criticism takes it many places, but I personally have found this book has been great. This Dare to Lead that I showed you on another chart earlier on has helped me think about things in terms of a positive, the criticism rather than the negative. It has certainly helped me with finding my blind spots, making plans for improvement and improving our alignment. But you've got to be comfortable with vulnerability and you've got to be aware of things that you don't always want to hear. And it doesn't actually have to be with your direct team. It's something that also within this network I mentioned, I've had emails from some of the other people there that are running completely different businesses, but because they've been involved with groups that I'm involved with, that moderating those groups, they've asked me for feedback about their style and how they do it, because actually I'm not as emotionally connected or regularly as involved as they are. And they found that to be quite useful as well. But yeah, you've got to trust what comes up there. So part of this lack of alignment has prompted us to bring in what we call a non-exec director. So it's somebody that isn't it's in effect a consultant, is not employed full-time by the business or a permanent employee. We didn't want somebody that tells us what we should and shouldn't do and does that kind of hustling thing like we're trying to do as such. But somebody that has different business experience, that's able to sanity check our ideas and actually hold us to task, keep us accountable for these initiatives that we say that we're going to do, and be there at the end of the phone should there be any issues, for example. I mean, I know that sounds a bit needy, but kind of given that we're opening ourselves up to things, it's always useful to maybe have a sanity check. So Francis joined us a couple of months ago, and as part of that, again, he's asked us awkward questions about us as a team and our business. And this is where we were tasked with the idea of doing a customer survey about ourselves and our employees. And this is where actually our lovely Carol came into it. I needed somebody that wasn't part of the organisation, that didn't know us so well, that could go out and have those good in-depth conversations with our clients to hear that warts and all kind of conversation. We didn't know what we were going to get back, and it was a bit worrying actually, but we're very glad that we did do that. It felt uncomfortable, but fortunately we were able to say that we are the key supplier for our key clients, regardless of research or other things, which was a big surprise and great. And also us as a team. There was almost an equal amount of balance between who a client would go to if there's a problem, myself and my colleagues. And also from the team's perspective as well, when they were asked who's the boss, they came back saying all three of us equally. It was an interesting sort of thing to feel. And that kind of takes me on to my next point, actually, because the fact that we as a business are perceived, the three of us, to be equal to the staff, equal to the clients, from a personal perspective, being the major equity holder, that has raised maybe concerns in terms of it's not all revolving around me. It isn't my gig. This gig belongs to other people as well, but that in turn also brings with it the benefit of knowing that it's a shared risk, it's a shared thing in the party, that you're not on your own. And so there's an idea of being egalitarian, and I think the fact that we're different ages, different specialisms, different places, it's an unusual thing to see. But what it has enabled us to do is produce, I suppose, a how can I help you culture. The no question is too silly. People are willing to jump in and help each other, because I think what they're probably seeing from us is the idea that they can, there's a delegation, there's a trust model. But yeah, it was really quite awkward at the beginning. I felt personally, I suppose, in terms of where do I sit? I should be the oldest one. I should be the one on top. But it's actually worked out for the best. It doesn't feel quite so lonely at the top, knowing that you've got other people that are equally committed. But that commitment, of course, as I mentioned earlier, brings with it passions and clashes. So hence we've had to find ways of sorting it out. But the clients do seem to be getting a similar experience as a result of that. And in terms of this African proverb, in terms of whether you want to go fast or far, I would definitely say this is the case. So when it comes round to being asked that question by the people that I've met through various networking questions as to why do I have the same job title as my fellow directors? Why am I not necessarily putting my head against the parapet? You say, I would say that everybody else is telling you that the best thing to do is stand out as a leader and be different and lead from the front. Whereas I'm telling you, actually being part of the pack and moving it along with you is a far better place to be, in my experience. Right. So in terms of other questions that I get asked, particularly in that network as such, is that one of the most common ones being, so Jane, how can you help me get that kind of strong, productive work culture? And that's an interesting one. I mean, the answer is yes, of course, and I might turn around and say, okay, I can give you a survey, but that's not the part about it. What I've created is a small PDF that lists some of the text that I've read, the key questions that we ask in our 360, and some of the key contacts that I've met over this process that have helped me develop as a leader. And I'd be happy to share that with you at sapioresearch.com reflections. And that will hopefully give you stuff that maybe is of use and curiosity, things to consider perhaps, books themselves, as you say, things to consider, and maybe shift your mindset in terms of how you work with teams and as a team. Which means that you'll have plenty of food for thought and self-growth. And if you're a good, happy person moving in a comfortable position, that's only got to help you in your business and what you're trying to achieve. So whether you're on your own and you're looking for new ideas, whether you're part of a team and you're looking maybe to empower more people, or whether you're just simply curious about new reading, I would suggest that you have a look at that PDF on sapioresearch.com reflections. There's going to be something there. So picture a day where instead of feeling dread at the sheer number of fires that you have to fight, you feel confident that you're not on your own. Picture a day when a young staff member or peer that you're working with comes up to you and says, I've got this nailed, I've got a great idea, this is how we can do it. And picture a day when you feel confident enough that you can make your own, the right decision, and the team that you're working with will cover those bases. And when you come back, that you're welcome with open arms. And that doesn't just have to be employees, that can be the team that you work around in terms of the freelance network. So I'll just leave you with this final thought. back in the days when you could be a university fresher and actually meet people socially, I joined a canoe club. I wanted to do something new. I wanted to experience different things. So I decided to join the canoe club. So after many sessions in the pool of being dunked and getting wet, we were allowed to go into the white water. We were taken away for the weekend and I was really excited. But it actually scared the life out of me, getting there, seeing this water. But I had a go, I got onto it. And again, I got duly dunked and it didn't feel great. I was told I would get better with practice. That didn't necessarily happen, and my comfort with water didn't necessarily improve either. But I stayed at it because this was my first year in uni. I wanted to make friends. I wanted to stay there for other reasons. And as it happened, I ended up meeting some flatmates that I lived with in the second year. One of those flatmates, a few months later, actually I turned out to start going out with. He was one of the instructors. And then 10 years after that, I'm now in a position where, well, I was then in a position 10 years ago where I married him and we had 2 beautiful daughters. I am still married to him now, so we're actually talking 30 years ago. But if I hadn't have stuck with that, if I hadn't have confronted my fears and thought, well, I'll just stay around the edge and see if I can find something else that suits me and I can get something else out of this, I wouldn't be in a position now where I have 2 intelligent, beautiful, lovely daughters. I would have just walked away and not confronted my fears. And I'm sure we all have times when things feel uncomfortable and we don't necessarily want to look at ourselves and what we can do differently. So I would maybe take a few moments and consider looking and reading things in a slightly different way so you can take the opportunities that are made available to you. Thank you. Super. That's me, and I'm happy to take questions. I know there was an awful lot in there. And they say this is just my experience. It's not a right or wrong. It's just something that I thought I would share with you guys to see whether it sort of prompted any sort of curiosity or questions amongst yourselves.
That's terrific, Jane. Thank you so much. If anybody has got any questions, you have a chance to switch on or at least switch your microphone on and open them up, or you can put some questions in the chat. I have a question, which is just have the challenge of lockdown, of working remotely, of dealing with people online. How have you met that challenge differently? And also, do you envisage it reverting or staying the same or evolving even further as we go forward?
Yeah, these are good questions. I mean, when you do it differently to that which we did in the past, or differently to maybe how other people are doing it? I'm just so I'm not telling you how to sack eggs.
No, sorry, I'm just sort of thinking how people are, how collaboration is and collaborative leadership is very relevant to the ICT, and it for me always works better when you're kind of up close and personal, you're in the same room and all the rest of it, and we haven't been able to do that. So I'm just wondering how that collaboration, lessons you've learned on challenging collaboration when we've had to do it remotely, and how that's altered people, and perhaps looking forward we might have to address not doing it remotely in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Maybe if I tackle it from the perspective of not so much the creativity collaboration, but the communication part of it. What we have as a team, when we were in the office together, we were maybe having 2 or 3 meetings a week where we're kind of reviewing the project, what's going on, what problems do you need assistance with, and so the more junior staff, of course, would listen to those things and build up their knowledge that way. That took quite a while. That was part of our getting a process involved, and it's while you're in an office, we didn't feel it was necessary to sort of put almost a formal communication process in place. So actually, the fact that we'd started that when we went online actually turned out to be a brilliant. We had the forum there, we had the platform, we had our sheets there, and what we end up doing now is every morning at 9:15 we all get online and we all go through. It's the same structure. We've got the projects as to what's where, what's the date, who needs assistance, who's got problems, and then we work out who needs to talk offline in more detail to help with those things, who wants to then speak to the various project managers. So, and bearing in mind 3 of our staff we've employed since lockdown actually never met them in person, so all of this has had to be done remotely. So there's another bit that we add to that. So the proper meeting starts at 9:15 for the official going through it, but we said that the invite starts 15 minutes before that. So those that want to get online beforehand and have the chats are able to do that. That it's not considered to be wasting time as such. It's the have a chat and all the rest of it. I tend to avoid those because I don't want to stifle any of those conversations. So when I come in, there's often at the end of a very bizarre conversation, but these guys at least having the opportunity to talk to each other about things that aren't work. And another great initiative one of the girls came up with, it was the coffee break moments. So scheduling in this is not a work conversation, this is just let's talk about you, your life, whatever it is. And we each were tasked to book a time of 10-15 minutes with 2 individuals a week, and we set a little a rotation thing there, and that has proved to be really interesting to learn more about the people, more about the person. And I think those kind of things, when it comes to, right, we've got this particular project, this particular brief, this particular question set that we need to get our heads around, kind of it means that we're a lot more comfortable with each other. You don't necessarily have to do that storming and norming quite so much up front, because that's somebody that I know I've spoken to half an hour ago or what have you, or I know a bit more about them. But it sounds odd, but it's routine is actually, I personally think, has helped us get our kind of conversation and creativity sorted. Now to the question about what will we do in the future, good question.
Yes, I think particularly for people who've kind of joined, that their norm is actually doing it like you're doing it now, and they've never actually experienced you in real life. So what are the challenges there?
Yeah, well, quite a few of them have actually moved back to their homes, moved back with parents. So then you've got the distance thing, Derbyshire, Sussex, whereas our office is in London. We're going to deal with that one later, I think. But there are a couple that are closer to the office that are itching to get into it. So we had a brief period where we tried to get into the office, and we tried to do a bit of a rotation thing. So space-wise, you weren't all in there, so you didn't overdo the COVID thing. What I was mindful of that is that if you're not careful, you end up getting certain bunches of people, because a Thursday suits some people better than a Monday and so forth. So I think what we're going to do is a half and half. So whereby part of the time is specified, looking at it above in terms of who's working on what, and then part of the time you can choose being in the office. So 2 + 2 + 1, for example. So definitely 2 days at home, definitely 2 days in the office, and one that you can choose. But will probably an element of see how it's going, and then make nudges of, hang on guys, you can't always do the same 2 days together, you've got to mix it across each other. But that possibly will be related according to the projects that they're working on as to what makes more sense for that conversation. But yeah, some of these people have never been into our office, they don't know what it's like, so it's going to be, yeah, it's going to be interesting. But from the conversations we have with them on the screen, things feel comfortable at the moment. So yeah, does that help?
Excellent. Yeah, brilliant. Kind of fine. It will be, I think, we're going to have to see how it goes. That sort of listening and learning as you go is important as well.
I'm
Okay.
interested about the official. Sorry, carry on.
I have a question, Jane.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. That was really a great talk. I like all the talk about the emotional side, and we don't talk about it enough, I think. So it's really good to, yeah, very brave as well.
Thank you.
In terms of the collaborative approach, what kind of numbers in a team works? I mean, where big can you be and still have this mindset?
Good question. I suppose maybe from a management perspective, that might be different to a project execution perspective. Maybe if we think about it from a project point of view, collaborative, although we've talked about non-hierarchical, we still do try to have this is the person that's leading it, this is the person that's supporting it, and these are the experts that you pull in on the odd occasions that you need to just bolster up that thing. Any less than 2, it kind of doesn't work. You've got nobody to bounce things off, and if you get knocked down by a bus tomorrow, it's all gone. So a minimum of 2. But any more than about 4, then you end up tripping over your feet, I think, if you're moving things quite quick moving. So that doesn't tend to work. do you know what, in terms of how it works as a management team and how it works as a business, until we grow larger, I'm not sure what the right number is. I think personally for us, the 3 works nicely, because if you've all got a vote each, which we do, it means that there's never one person that's going to take it in a completely different direction. There has to be compromise. Okay, you end up with camels at that time rather than horses sometimes, but it does mean that there's somebody pulling you from the edge from an actually stupid decision, potentially, that kind of the whole headstrong, this is the right direction. There's a sanity check thing going on. Whereas when there was 4 of us, there was possibly too much of that going on. There's almost sides or whatever that could end up happening, and that wasn't necessarily helpful. I think odd numbers are probably better, I think, in terms of that collaboration thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really interesting. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, so I think, unless there's anything else, there's a nice comment from somebody who's had to leave, Jane, which says, apologies, I have another meeting to go for. This has been really interesting and definitely prompting some very relevant reflection. So job done, I'd say, sort of fine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I think probably, unless there's a final question from anybody who's there, whatever, I'd say thank you very much, Jane. It really has been reflective, and thank you for spending the time on doing it for us. And the PDF will be on your website, yeah?
Yes, yep. That's my job this afternoon.
Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon and a happy weekend.
Lovely, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.